and welcome to the first video of 2026. Today we're going to talk about my favorites of 2025. Starting with some honorable mentions. These books are books that I very much enjoyed. And the reason they are not favorites is just because of a feeling, because of a vibe, because of something I just felt. Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. This book I liked. I liked the combination of like the humor of it with this like dark hellscape setting. I liked the academia. I liked how heavily it leaned into that and how there were like citations and quotes from academic works and textbooks sprinkled throughout the book. I really ate that up. I did. I'm gonna be honest. I ate it up. I liked the magic and how the magic relied on riddles and paradoxes and lies. I thought that was interesting. I felt like it was fitting for this academic story set in hell. Like it just felt very fitting to me. One reason I feel like this wasn't a complete favorite for me is that there were times where I felt like it got a little bit slow for my taste. There were times when, like early on in the book, I was like, why are we saving this person? It sounds like they should be in hell and they should be left in hell. Why are we trying so hard to save this person? So there was also that too, where I just wasn't completely on board with why Alice and Peter were going through all of this strife, were going through all of this. But I also enjoyed the ride that I was on. I enjoyed being in hell with Alice and Peter. Even if I didn't agree with why they were on the journey, I liked the journey that they were on. So those are my thoughts about Katabasis. Next is Anatomy. This one was fun. I liked this. I liked the setting. I personally just love Edinburgh, Scotland. Being in a story that takes place in the like late 1800s Victorian era, and it's kind of gruesome, kind of Frankenstein-y, kind of, we're grave digging and then, cutting into these cadavers and learning about anatomy. I don't know. It was just, I really liked the setting and all of it put together. The one thing that kept this from being like a favorite is that it felt YA to me. And I myself am not in the YA age range. And so although I did have a lot of fun with it, there were parts of it that I could just feel that if I were a teenager, I'd like this better. But because I'm not, I liked it a lot, but I could have liked it more. You know what I mean? I really enjoyed reading it for and around Halloween time. Yeah, I'm excited to read the second one probably next Halloween. The next honorable mention is in this category because I've already read it before, but I reread it this year and just loved my experience rereading it. So this is Northanger Abbey. If you watched my last video, you will have heard me just gushing about Northanger Abbey and how I loved rereading it this year. It's one of Jane Austen's less popular works, but I love it, okay? I love that it is meta, that it is a book that is poking fun at tropes in other books, but also admiring other books and like also lifting up and encouraging reading in its own way. I don't know. In this book, we have our main character who just loves reading, loves her novels, and you see how that shapes the way she lives her life, the way she views the world, the way she interacts with people. And I love that. I have to say, there are moments in my own life where, the stories I've read or movies I've watched have definitely impacted my actions and the way that I've seen the world. And so that's just something that is so relatable to me and something that I just love. And so to read about a character by one of my favorite authors and be reminded of this character who just loves books and loves her stories and like that's how her worldview is so influenced by these stories that she loves. It's just felt very personal to me and I loved it. And the last honorable mention is Every Heart a Doorway. This by Seanan McGuire. This book surprised me, and I feel like books that surprise me in a good way. It surprised me in a good way, but also just it surprised me. Like, and if a book surprises me like that, there's a good chance it's going to end up on this list. The reason this book surprised me is that I expected it to be very whimsical, very cute, and it was not cute. It was whimsical, but I wouldn't call it cute. It was dark. It was moody. It was mysterious. It was not cute. But I ended up really liking that. I liked the darkness, made it feel more serious, more impactful, more real, more... There was something about that kind of balanced out the cuteness of the idea, sharpened it so that it cut through me and just made and left a mark on me. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to have a cute, fun time and then move on and not think about it again. And it wasn't that, and it stuck with me in a way that I think is just a really interesting, like I mentioned in the video that I made about this, it's a really interesting juxtaposition of fantasy and reality, of light and dark. And it balances those. I don't know if it balances those. It's more dark than it is light, but it fits together just as it should, and I really liked it. Moving on to my favorites of the year, starting with one of my favorite series. Yes, I read many, I got into many series this year that I really enjoyed. So, one of my favorite series that I read this year is the Ember and Ashes series. I have the book right here. The Ember and Ashes series. This reminded me what it's like to find a series, to get swept away and want more than just one book in a world with a certain set of characters. This reminded me the magic of series. I loved series as a teenager because I could just, if I started the one book and I really liked it, I knew what I was going to be reading for the near future. I knew what book I was going to read next. And there was something about that I loved. I ate it up. I needed that too as a teenager. And so it just reminded me of like all the series that I read when I was younger and that experience of just getting swept away. And I loved my experience with the Ember and Ashes series, as I talked about in my last video. I also just love Sabatir's writing, particularly in this series. I love that. I enjoyed this. Even though I'm an adult, I'm not the target audience for this series. I enjoyed it just as much as anybody else. The characters felt so complex and real to me. There was no character none of the characters were just black and white. And in a series like this, you could very easily just have the bad guy could just be pure evil. And that could just be that. But nobody is that one-dimensional. Nobody is just all good or all bad. And there are characters that at the beginning of the series, I didn't think much about. For example, there's a character that I was like, oh, okay, she's the third point in this love triangle. After this first book, she's going to disappear. I don't really care that much about her. I'm not going to get that invested in her because I know she's going to disappear after this first book, whatever. But then throughout the rest of the series, she became one of my favorite characters because she became so much more than just the third point of a love triangle. It wasn't about the love triangle anymore, but I really appreciated that character and really, really grew to love that character by the end of the series. There was a lot that I connected with her on when it came to her relationship with her siblings and her family. There was a lot that I related to her on with responsibility and duty and commitments that she has made and things like that. And so I don't know, I just love the series, and that's an example of another thing I mentioned in my last video, in that Sabaa Tahir is using these tropes that are very popular in the YA fantasy or dystopian genre, but she does it differently so that it doesn't feel the same. They're just done better. They're used better and not in a cheap cliche kind of way. Those are my thoughts on the Ember and Ashes series. Yay! Okay, next is Return of the King. This is the final book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I read this back at the beginning of the year, and finishing this book was quite the accomplishment for me. This was something I never thought I'd do. Although grew up watching the Lord of the Rings movies, I never thought I could read the books. I don't know. I told myself that it was like too serious, that, there was too much world building and that I would get distracted and I wouldn't like it or whatever. And so finishing this book was really an accomplishment for me. I loved it. Return of the King has always been my favorite Lord of the Rings movie, and so to read the book was so fun because I just love that story so much. I'm already familiar with a lot of it, but then there was so much more in the book that I wasn't aware of previously that I had a lot of fun experiencing for the first time. Yeah, this one is a favorite. Partially because of just the accomplishment of it, and then also partially just because it's good. It's a classic. Lord of the Rings shaped the fantasy genre as we know it today, and you can tell. As you're reading it, you can see that. And having read so many other fantasy books too, I can see that in so many of the other fantasy books I've read, and it's so cool to see that connection and continue to see that as I continue to read more fantasy books. I just feel like a real fantasy reader now that I have finished Lord of the Rings. Moving on, we're going to talk about Emily Wilde, the Emily Wilde trilogy. I needed this year. There was something about this trilogy that was the perfect amount of whimsical, the perfect amount of cozy and slow and comforting, while also having things that were still engaging to me. And it's a cozy, when people classify this as cozy fantasy, they mean it. It is a slower plot. And I find that like cozy fantasy, slow plots are a hit or miss for me. Sometimes I really like them and sometimes I really don't. This one I happen to like, and I think it was because of the timing of it. When I was reading these books, I needed something slower. I needed something cozy, but something that still reminded me of me and like who I am and what I like. And I like, stories about magic. I like stories where people use their knowledge of stories to get through the challenges in their journey or on their adventure. And so I love that. And I like Emily. I feel like I related to her in a lot of ways. Especially at this time, I related to, putting your work first above everything, and relate to her like more quiet, introverted nature. I also relate to like her curiosity and her desire to learn and explore. I liked Emily Wilde. There was a lot I liked about it. I related to Emily in several different ways, and I needed something cozy when I read it. So it was perfect. I liked it. We're moving on. I've been talking too long and I didn't plan this video as much as I should have. Whoops. Okay. Next we're going to talk about Little Thieves. Little Thieves. Okay. This book is a fairy tale retelling of the Goose Girl, and it is a darker version of the Goose Girl, and it is from the maid's perspective. If you know the Goose Girl fairy tale, it is about a princess who is betrayed by her maid, and her maid takes her place and marries the king of a neighboring kingdom instead of the princess. And so this is the story from the maid's perspective instead of the princess's perspective. I grew up loving another retelling of this same fairy tale by Shannon Hale. That is like one of my all-time favorite books, and so I was interested to read this because of that connection. And this is what I wanted A Sorceress Comes to Call to be. That is another book that was inspired by the Goose Girl, and I knew that both A Sorceress Comes to Call and Little Thieves would be darker than the Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, and I was interested in that. I was curious how much darker these books would be. But yeah, I liked Little Thieves a lot better than A Sorceress Comes to Call. I still liked that one, but that one didn't have enough Goose Girl flavor to it. This one had the right amount of darkness, the right amount of Goose Girl inspiration to it, and I had so much fun reading this book. I had so much fun reading this book. It reminded me of me. To me, reading this book, this was like, it reminded me of when I first read The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale and fell in love with that fairy tale back when I was 11 or 12 years old. But it felt like a new me, a new version of me that's like a little bit older, that likes a little bit of spooky, that likes some spooky reads, that likes some paranormal, some horror reads. And so it was like it just felt like me, but me grown up, you know? And yes, this is a YA book. I get that, but like, it's again similar to Sabbath to Hear, the Sabbath to Hear books. It didn't feel YA to me. It felt like me, but like me where I'm at in my life right now, not me where I was at when I was 12. All right, 10,000 Stitches. This one, similar to the whole Little Thieves compared to the Goose Girl thing, this one reminds me of Ella Enchanted. Let me rewind real quick. 10,000 Stitches is the second book in the Regency Fairy Tale series. It is loosely inspired by Cinderella, and because of that, it reminded me of Ella Enchanted, which is another all-time favorite of mine. I have loved that. This is the first time I read it when I was 11 or 12, and all throughout middle school and high school, I reread this almost obsessively. Okay, not obsessively, but I reread it multiple times a year. I loved Ella Enchanted so much, and I still do. It still has I still love it. But I will admit, I reread it a year or two ago, and I'm not the target audience anymore, and so it felt very young to me. But 10,000 Stitches, in the same way that Little Thieves felt like the more grown-up version of my love for Goose Girl, this felt like the more grown-up version of my love for Ella Enchanted. And so both of these books, both Little Thieves and 10,000 Stitches, just reminded me of a part of myself that I didn't realize I wanted to be reminded of, that I wanted to be reignited. And so I just love both of those books and the experience I had with both of those books for that reason. I also love, in 10,000 Stitches, I love Effie's anger. I'm just gonna say that. I love it. I feel that as an adult in the world that we live in. I feel a similar anger a lot of the time. So I related to that. All right, now for my favorite of the year, and that is A Study in Drowning. I've talked about this nonstop for the last 3 or 4 videos I've made. So sorry, but not sorry. I was talking to some friends recently, and they were asking me about my favorite books that I've read this year, and I mentioned this one, and I was trying to describe it to them and like what stood out to me about this book and why this is my favorite of the year. And this is how I described it, or how I think I described it. It's a gothic historical fantasy that feels like a fairy tale, but it's not about the fantasy. It's not about the magic in the way that you would expect a fantasy to be about the magic. The real magic in this world is stories, and the main character that we are experiencing this story through is, throughout the story, her journey in this story, she is learning more about stories, what stories she's told herself throughout her life, and how those stories have affected her, the stories that she has read in books that she has fallen in love with, and how those have helped her cope and survive. The stories she's told herself about herself, the stories that her family has told her about herself, and it's really about the impact of stories and how that can be magical and how it can also be harmful. And she, our main character Effie, and us as readers, we are learning about stories as she is learning more about the author of her favorite story ever. And so she's learning about his life, his home, his family, and it has her questioning her own stories about her own life and her home and her family and her past and people who have hurt her. And it's about stories. That's what I got from this. That's what I loved from this. I loved that there were moments where there was magic, but the book isn't about magic. It isn't about this grand fantasy fairy tale story. It's about a girl. It's about her life. It's about her breaking down stories that have harmed her throughout her life. It's about her using stories to survive difficult things throughout her life. And that just felt, going back to what I was talking about with Northanger Abbey, I too, the stories that I read, the stories that I watch on TV or in movies, they deeply impact me in the way I see my life too. And so that was something that I really connected with in A Study in Drowning. That's why it's my favorite of 2025. Now, before I end the video, here are a few other favorite stories, not necessarily books, because I do love stories, not just books. And in past years, I have dedicated a whole section of this video to movies and TV shows. This year, I didn't consume as many TV shows or movies as I have in past years, so I didn't feel like those needed their own section, but here are a few that I liked. And yeah, those have been the stories that I have loved the most this year. I would love to know what books or movies or TV shows or anything have impacted you this year. What stories have shaped the way you will be viewing the world and viewing things into this next year? What stories shaped you in that way? Please let me know down in the comments below. I would love to hear and get some more recommendations for my TBR. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening to me ramble about books, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.